The use of the word mammoth as an adjective to refer to something really, really large makes sense. After all, it's referring to a prehistoric animal that was really, really large. Derived from a Siberian word for earth, the term arose in the early 18th century, but it might surprise you to find out that it was originally only used as a noun and didn't become used as an adjective until the early 19th century, and its first such use seems to have been referring to a block of cheese. In the 233-year history of the American presidency, American presidents have been gifted all sorts of strange things, large and small. And in 1836, Andrew Jackson was given a surprise gift of a massive wheel of cheese. And while a huge presidential cheese might itself be worthy of discussion, the surprising part is that it wasn't even the first truly ridiculously large wheel of cheese to be gifted to a United States president. The mammoth presidential cheeses are history that deserve to be remembered. Jefferson's ascension to the presidency in 1800 was far from harmonious, and came at the end of the first truly contentious election in American history. Jefferson's Democratic Republicans battled against John Adams' Federalists for control of the nation's future, and the campaign strained Jefferson's and Adams' friendship for years afterwards. In rural Massachusetts, a particularly staunch Jefferson supporter was Baptist preacher John Leland, who had lived near Jefferson for years in Virginia. Massachusetts was home to Adams and largely Federalist, but in small Cheshire it was Democratic-Republican. Leland, possibly inspired by a group in England who had made a large wheel of cheese for George III, decided to urge his congregation to make the greatest cheese ever put to press in the New World or Old in honor of the president. According to one newspaper, the milk from 900 cows was brought together on a particular day and pressed in a makeshift cheese press made from a cider press, probably in August of 1801. The wheel was 4 feet in diameter, 18 inches tall, and probably weighed in at more than 1,200 pounds, although at least one report claims it weighed as much as 1,600. The cheese was also a political statement. Leland demanded that no federal cow was included, lest it should leaven the whole lump with a distasteful savor. A local newspaper went so far as to describe the cows as Republican. Leland was also proud to announce that the cheese was produced by the personal labor of freeborn farmers, with the voluntary and cheerful aid of their wives and daughters, without the assistance of a single slave. It was originally intended for the elective president of a free people, and with a principal view of casting a mite into the even scale of federal democracy. It was engraved with the motto, "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God," which Jefferson used as his own personal seal. The cheese immediately became the center of political comment. Jefferson was a keen paleontologist and financially supported the work of Charles Wilson Peale, who in 1801 discovered a remarkable mastodon specimen in New York. Jefferson famously argued with European scientists who claimed that American animals were weak and degenerate compared to Old World animals in his Notes on Virginia, with mammoth bones making up a significant part of his argument. Federalists latched onto what they saw as ridiculous and dubbed the Cheshire cheese the Mammoth Cheese, the first recorded instance of the word mammoth being used as an adjective. Another critic called it a monument to human weakness and folly. Unfortunately for the Federalists, Jefferson supporters latched onto the term as well, but thought of it as endearing. Mammoth vegetables were suddenly marketed all over the country, as was a mammoth bread and a mammoth veal. Cheese was supposed to be transported in the spring, but its enormous size convinced Leland to try transporting it in the winter by sleigh. It took 3 weeks for the huge cheese to be transported, first by sleigh, then by sloop, and finally by wagon, with Leland preaching all along the way, earning himself the name Mammoth Priest. Leland presented the cheese to Jefferson on New Year's Day, 1802. The White House bore a large sign in anticipation, "The greatest cheese in America for the greatest man in America." Leland offered the cheese as a token of profound respect to the popular ratification of his election. Jefferson accepted the gift as extraordinary proof of the skill with which these domestic arts are practiced. Jefferson did not like receiving gifts as president, so he paid the congregation $200 and then cut a piece of the cheese for the people of Cheshire to have a taste. One writer called it the most perfect specimen of cheese ever exhibited at the White House. The cheese remained for some time in the Mammoth Room, probably the East Room. Jefferson gave cheese away to various groups and continued to serve the cheese at various functions. If you're wondering how the cheese lasts so long without refrigeration, understand that cheese was invented thousands of years before refrigeration and is actually a means of preserving food. The Mammoth cheese was a type of cheddar, a cheese with a relatively low moisture content that can last for weeks or months at room temperature without spoiling. Though it isn't clear exactly how long it remained in the White House, it appears to have been present at the president's house the following New Year's Day, and a report suggests it was still there in March 1804 or later, although reports suggest that large chunks were ruined by spoilage, and it isn't clear when it was finally finished off or if it was eventually chucked in the Potomac. A senator who ate some at dinner years after it was presented noted that the cheese was very far from being good. More than 30 years later, the concept of a Mammoth cheese had not faded from public memory. Thomas Standish Meacham, a dairy farmer in the small town of Sandy Creek, New York, owned the most pretentious and extensive dairy in the country. He was called Colonel, although he doesn't seem to have served in the army, and the title likely came from the local militia. But by far his greatest fame came from the construction of a giant cheese wheel. In 1835, Meacham decided to make an enormous cheese wheel to bring fame to himself, his small town, and the state of New York. Especially on his mind was the Erie Canal, which had brought prosperity to many who could now ship their goods west to the growing country. It was not Meacham's first huge cheese wheel. He was locally famous already for producing huge wheels of cheese and presented one to the city of Rochester on July 1st, 1835. In September, Meacham hired a carpenter to construct a special structure to press the cheese. The structure included a frame, hoops, and of course a press to form his prodigious block. For days, 154 cows from his farm produced milk, which Meacham heated and curdled. The curds were then put into the frame, tightly packed into the mold, and pressed. All told, the cheese was said to be 4 feet in diameter and 2 feet wide, a titanic cheddar, if ever there was one. On September 23rd, the Philadelphia Inquirer reported that Meacham intends, it seems, to go the whole cheese and present the monster to General Jackson. The cheese was inscribed grandly for the president. From the dairy of Thomas S. Meacham of Oswego County, New York, at the request of the citizens of Oswego County, to show their high regard for and to do honor to the Chief Magistrate of the United States. Meacham hadn't stopped at the single cheese wheel either. In addition to the large wheel, he made several smaller wheels, about half the size of his Mammoth cheese. One was destined for the vice president, Martin Van Buren, another for William Marcy, governor of New York, another for famous orator Daniel Webster, and one each for the United States Congress and the New York State Legislature. In addition to those, the Long Island Star reported that he made 300 cheeses weighing 150 pounds apiece. Other reports suggest that he was sending large wheels to various cities as well. In memory of Jefferson's cheese, the press dubbed them the Mammoth Cheeses. The cheese was meant to be a spectacle from the start. In addition to the cheese itself, it was decorated finely. A national belt was wrapped around the cheese, presenting a fine bust of the president, surrounded by a chain of 24 states united and linked together, this belt. The paper goes on. It is intended for a wrapper to the Mammoth cheese when presented to the president. Each was decorated with appropriate paintings and motions, along with dedications to the recipients. In addition to 24 staves, each decorated to represent a state, the cheese was adorned with many patriotic phrases, such as, "The Union, it must be preserved," and was bound together by one huge hickory loop, likely a reference to General Jackson's nickname, Old Hickory. The cheeses were moved from Sandy Creek in a huge colored wagon, with much fanfare. At the village of Pulaski, the cheeses were accompanied by 60 gray horses, a procession of citizens, and guns were fired, and other demonstrations. On November 23rd, the cheese was displayed in Utica, New York. Mr. T.S. Meacham exhibited in the city on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week a cheese weighing 1,400 pounds, made from the milk of 150 cows for 4 days at his dairy. The newspaper reported it bore the following inscription: "To Andrew Jackson, President of the United States." By November 30th, the cheeses were on display in Albany at the Exchange Coffee House, corner of South Market and Hamilton Streets. December 1st saw the cheese arrive in New York aboard the steamship Emerald, and the Evening Post described them as the largest cheeses probably ever manufactured. They were displayed in Masonic Hall for the inspection of those who take an interest in our agricultural affairs. It was joined in New York by a 400-pound roll of butter sent by Meacham's wife. A reporter in the New York Spectator said the butter displayed vertically reminded him of Cairo and the pyramids, Pompey's pillar, and Cleopatra's needle. Remained in New York City for at least a week before making his way south towards Washington. Wherever they went, the cheeses made a huge wave. For Meacham, they were a huge success, bringing in crowds and generally spreading his name about, as well as the success of agriculture in New York. The cheeses were slowly doled out to their respective recipients. Presumably, the cheese for the New York legislature and the New York governor were left in Albany, and Daniel Webster accepted his cheese in New York on December 8th. On December 31st, the Maryland Gazette reported that the cheeses were in Baltimore, and the largest was finally delivered to Andrew Jackson on New Year's Day, 1836. In a letter, Jackson told the people of Sandy Creek that the gifts were truly gratifying as evidence of the prosperity of our hardy yeomanry in the state of New York. The cheese was present at the New Year's festivities, when a reporter wrote that in anteroom of the executive mansion were stationed the New York Mammoth Cheese, Jeremy O'Neill, the doorkeeper, and a band of music. Jackson had some of the cheese cut for himself and friends, but unlike Jefferson, didn't have years to do away with the thing in small pieces. At some point, it's not clear when, he had it moved to the East Room and left it there. What to do with the cheese would eventually become a pressing question, as Jackson declined to run for a third term and supported his vice president, Martin Van Buren, who won the election in 1836. Perhaps considering the difficulty of moving what was still most of a 1,400-pound wheel of cheese, towards the end of Jackson's presidency, Jackson decided he would give the cheese to the people. Purportedly, this was a way for the president and his staff to commune with the common folk to discuss their concerns, although the motive might have been every bit as much to offload excess cheddar. In a letter dated February 4th, Jackson told a friend that he intended to have eaten on the 22nd instant my large cheese, presented by my friends of the state of New York. In the 19th century, February 22nd was a well-known holiday for George Washington's birthday, since then combined with President's Day. Serving the president's cheese was a hit, and all of Washington shut down early, despite Congress having only a few days before its session ended and the incoming Congress was inaugurated with Martin Van Buren on March 4th. The whole of this day has been devoted to cheese, declared a reporter. The big New York cheese has been cut up in the president's mansion, devoured or carried off, and the White House stinks, and the House of Representatives is rank with cheese, and the whole atmosphere of the city is infected with cheese. As many as 10,000 people might have swarmed the White House for a taste of cheese. The multitude swarmed in, according to one report. All you heard was cheese. All you saw was cheese. All you smelt was cheese. Streams of cheese were going up the avenue in everybody's fists. A day more disgustingly spent in the president's house there could not with difficulty be, wrote another. The White House smelt so of cheese that it was painful to breathe the air. When boys were refused entry, they simply went through the East Room's open windows to get a piece. Benjamin Perley Poore, in his reminiscence, wrote that the air was redolent with cheese, the carpet was slippery with cheese, and nothing else was talked about that day. It was Andrew Jackson's final appearance publicly as president, but he appeared only briefly and was described as very feeble. Getting rid of the cheese was one thing, but the evil-smelling horror of cheese took much longer to get rid of. Van Buren says that he had a hard task to get rid of the smell of cheese, and in the room where it was cut, he had to air the carpet for many days, to take away the curtains, and to paint it whitewash before he could get the victory over it. And he still had his own cheese, which one acquaintance said he knows not what to do with. What a foolish thing for a man to have made such a present to him or anyone else. It appears Van Buren disposed of his own 700-pound wheel at a charity auction in 1839. While the story of the Mammoth Cheeses is largely lost to history, it's certainly not entirely forgotten. It showed up in a 1999 episode of the television show The West Wing, although character Leo McGarry somewhat exaggerated the size of the original cheese in the episode. Referring to that episode, the Obama White House held what they called Big Block of Cheese Days as media events. In the White House webpage says, fromage to President Jackson. These virtual town halls paid some lip service to Andrew Jackson's idea of democratically giving away his extra cheese, but it is somewhat of a disappointment that no real cheese was involved. It might seem strange that a political statement was made via cheese, but at the time it really represented the attitude of the nation. It demonstrated the potential both of our people and our cows. And that idea that we make everything bigger in the United States is still a part of our culture, even though the world's record for the largest single block of cheese made from cow's milk has since 1995 been held by a Canadian company. Over the long history of the nation, many things, of course, have been gifted to United States presidents, but perhaps none more accurately represented the aspirations of the nation at the time as the Mammoth Cheeses. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy. Check out our community on thehistoryguideguild.locals.com, our webpage at thehistoryguy.com, and our merchandise at teespring.com, or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo. And if you'd like more episodes on Forgotten History, all you have to do is subscribe.